The Girl Who Wasn't There is a Jacqueline Wilson book from 2014. It was published March of this year. And as I've mentioned in my previous Jacqueline Wilson discussions, she's very much the reason I fell in love with reading and with writing. It was after I read Lola Rose that I started to really write a lot of fiction myself. And even now as an adult, even though I may not be the target audience in terms of age, I will continue to read everything Jacqueline Wilson releases. And the latest one to come my way is The Girl Who Wasn't There. I do have a couple of others to catch up with. She's very prolific, which is fantastic, but it means sometimes I fall a little bit behind. And I was really looking forward to reading this. I hadn't really read any reviews. I didn't really know what to expect. I think it's one of the worst she's written. And there are two key reasons for that, and I will talk about them in a moment. There is one thing I want to praise, but it is a spoiler, so I will leave that for the very end. But the point there, I guess, is that there are some okay things about this. The writing style is fine. Obviously, the grammar is perfectly fine, as is always the case with Jacqueline Wilson. But there are two factors that are very poorly done. And these are not spoilers, so I will talk about those first. And then, as I said at the end, I will give some positive thoughts, but it is a spoiler. The narrative focuses on a family, mother, father, two sisters, a 6-year-old Aurora, and our protagonist Luna, who is a little bit older. And they are moving into this tower. Their father, on a whim, without consulting anybody in the family, more on that in a little bit, decides to buy a tower. And it's a little bit away from where they currently live, so it involves moving schools as well, and all of this is established pretty quickly. And I won't say too much more about the specifics. I don't really know if I can tell you who the girl who wasn't there is or what that refers to, because it takes a while to happen. And again, I will come back to that in a moment. But the first issue I had happened pretty quickly, where everything felt really rushed. And we didn't get a lot of emotions from Luna, our protagonist. It's very convenient that she was, in the first few chapters, worried about leaving school, leaving her friend, and it just so happens that she fell out with her friend, so she could leave school without any emotions. But that felt very unbelievable. And I thought, okay, this is not a great start. That's not the only reason it wasn't a great start, but I'll talk more about the characters in a moment. And then after that point, we get off to a very rushed start, and then everything else is incredibly slow. When I say nothing happens for more than half the book, I am not exaggerating. It took over halfway for, I guess, the key point of the narrative to kick in. And I checked, because I was reading this really challenging to get through it. Normally I will read a Jacqueline Wilson book in 2, maybe 3 sittings, depending on how tired I am when I start reading at the end of the day. But with this one, it took over a week because it was just so dull. And I was waiting for something to happen, to the point where when it did happen, I actually checked. I read the Kindle version and I was over halfway through. And I'm not exaggerating when I say basically nothing happens for more than half of the book. To the point where on a couple of occasions, I would turn the page, realize I was at the end of the chapter, and was very confused, because a chapter should always move the narrative forward. There are exceptions. For example, if the chapter is introducing a new character, it might not move the narrative forward, but is bringing in a new element. Or if perhaps the chapter is completely a flashback or something, in those cases it might not move things forward. But in general, if the chapters are linear, as is the case here, every chapter should add something to the story so that we are progressing. And on multiple occasions, I'd realize I was at the end of the chapter and I was just confused because nothing had happened. We hadn't moved forward at all. There was no progression and nothing happens for a huge chunk of time. Does that mean everything happens towards the end? Honestly, no. There's not a great amount of variety. I won't say what happens in the second half or maybe even the final third, but certainly things do pick up. So if you are struggling to get through it because it's very dull and dry, and also another reason, which I'll discuss in a second, then I will say maybe try and push on because things do pick up, but it never becomes amazing. The other reason it doesn't work is because of the characters. They are incredibly insufferable. Luna is one of the most unrealistic protagonists in any Jacqueline Wilson book. She doesn't really have any faults. She is so perfect, and her emotions are often unbelievable. And at one point, everybody clapped. I kid you not, she did something and everybody clapped. It's absolutely ridiculous. Her sister, Aurora, is incredibly annoying. To be fair, I think maybe her character is the most realistic, but I also found her really irritating. Then we have the parents. The father is selfish, hot headed, horrendous as a human being. He does occasionally have glimmers of being a good person, but in general, he is not a nice person. He is selfish. Let's be honest, as soon as I learned that he bought a tower and then told the landlord, without consulting his wife first, told the landlord they wouldn't be renewing their lease without consulting his wife, he's not a good person and I don't care. There is nothing he can do to redeem himself. The mother is a tremendous pushover, and she kept Aurora. We learned this at the very beginning of the book. It's not a spoiler, but something happened. Aurora went to school and decided, okay, I don't want to go to school anymore when she was 5. And her mother went, okay, I'll keep you off school for an entire year then. Not a good parent. So there are a lot of issues with a lot of the characters. 3 of the characters, mother, father, Aurora, are just so annoying. And Luna, not very well written, not realistic, not believable. And unfortunately, that coupled with the absence of any real narrative for the bulk of the story means that it's not a good book. And I've never had this before with a Jacqueline Wilson story. Never. I usually have nothing but complete praise and adoration for her work. Occasionally, I might have a small point to mention, but in general, my discussions are, this is amazing, here's why. And unfortunately, I am struggling to find many positive things about the girl who wasn't there. There is one thing, and I will mention, as I said, in a moment with a spoiler warning, but honestly, aside from the grammar, the quality of the sentence structures, they're all absolutely fine. I wasn't expecting anything less. I would be slightly concerned if that was the case. But the actual narrative is very poorly handled. And I won't say what it is, but the girl who wasn't there, part of it, honestly was just handled quite poorly as well. I don't think that was handled very well at all. Not in the way that it would have been badly written if the pacing had been better, the narrative structure had been better. That part of it I probably would have thought could have been handled better, but it's okay. But then you throw in over half of the narrative just being nothing, and the characters being very badly written or annoying or both, it doesn't really have a lot to offer. Apart from the final thing that I'll mention now. So this is a spoiler, and the thing I want to mention is the ending. I'm not going to say how it ends, but I'll be honest, that last chapter was very well executed. Maybe the last 2 chapters. I honestly thought everything was wrapped up really well. It was wrapped up really nicely, and I think that it was pretty decent. Maybe I was just happy that it was finally over. I don't know. But I do think that everything that happened in the end made logical sense within the context of the narrative. I believed the characters' responses to the situation at the end. All of that was quite satisfying. So the final chapter, maybe the final 2 chapters, yeah, they were very well written. Everything else, really surprisingly, not so much. Do I recommend it? Only if you're a huge Jacqueline Wilson fan, and if, like me, you will read everything she's written. Obviously, with over 100 books to her name, something at some point had to be less than perfect. And unfortunately, the girl who wasn't there just isn't very well written at all.